Next slide, please. Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Subaward Subcommittee session. My name is Amanda Humphrey, and I'm joined today by Amanda Haymaker from Purdue University, Kevin Ritchie from Harvard Medical School, and Carrie Tetrault from the Institute for Systems Biology. Next slide, please. So today we're just going to run through our agenda very quickly. We'll do a quick reminder on our session format, subcommittee co-chair updates, subaward delays report out, state law discussion, some working group updates, and then a few other updates and discussion as we have time. Next slide, please. So please feel free to ask questions consistent with what Lillian said at the beginning. Please use the chat box, and during the discussion, if you raise your hand, we will ask to have you unmuted. We would like to have people be engaged throughout the session, so please feel free to ask questions in whatever format works for you. If there are unanswered questions at the end, we will follow up by posting to the listserv, and we're happy to de-identify questions if not previously de-identified. Next slide, please. Just a little update on our subcommittee co-chairs. Sadly, Amanda Haymaker is rolling off the subcommittee after more than 7 years of amazing service with our subcommittee. Amanda has worked tirelessly on a number of things for our subcommittee, in particular working on the subrecipient versus vendor determination, and working on a lot of FAQs and guidance and a lot of support for committee members and especially for her fellow co-chairs. Amanda is just a really great listener and very caring, and I know that I'm going to miss working with her. Luckily, she's not going far. She's taking an expanded leadership role in the expanded clearinghouse. So we will continue to be able to work with Amanda and get the benefit of her leadership and experience. Thank you, Amanda, for all of your work.
Thank you for those kind words. I guess time flies when you're having fun. I had no idea it'd been 7 years until you put this slide together and pointed that out. So that's amazing. And I am just grateful to have had the opportunity to serve in this role. And I've learned a lot from you all, and met so many great people. But with that, I want to introduce you to my replacement. So if we could go to the next slide. So we're excited to announce that Carrie Tetrault from the Institute for Systems Biology is going to take over as our new co-chair. Carrie has a background in grants management and has worked at institutions of a variety of different sizes and types. She has experience with clinical trial projects, departmental and central experience, and comes with a lot of enthusiasm and excitement for the role and what we do at FDP. So we want to thank all of our applicants. It was definitely a difficult choice. We had some great conversations with everyone who was interested, and welcome, Carrie. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Yeah, so I could just start by saying thank you, Amanda, as well for your work. And when I joined the subaward subcommittee, it was in a mentored co-chair role, and so I relied on Stephanie before you, but yourself and Amanda Humphrey to do that mentoring. And then to find out that you don't work on subawards on a daily basis is even more incredible. How much you could still contribute to the subaward subcommittee. So I work on subawards every day and still sometimes don't know what the heck is going on. So your expertise is like, we valued your expertise, and it was a pleasure to work with you. And I hope to connect with you elsewhere at FDP throughout, like, working with the expanded clearinghouse. So thanks for your work. Okay, on to the subaward delays survey. And as you can see here, I'll be presenting the final recommendations of this working group that has been out there for a little while now. We developed a survey in 2019 and launched in 2019. And then 2020 happened and priorities changed a little bit, but we recently reconvened the working group, and we do have some recommendations to present to the community today. So I'm excited about that. And I'm excited to finalize this working group. And some of you may have noticed in previous slides, just a quick note here that previous slides had 133 responses. We received 99 complete responses, but all of the Qualtrics data and percentages and whatnot that have been presented previously were already based off the 99 complete responses. So there's a little bit of noise around the edge for those that submitted incomplete responses, but 99 is still a lot. And I think we could say that that's representative of the subawards community. We are going to go through a lot of bullet points here, a lot of recommendations, and you can refer back to the slides when we post them in the future. But I also want to post or distribute some of the source data, a Qualtrics report on the survey itself, and then a Word document or some sort of document that explains the working group's analysis. And I think together those tools will help people that may want to revisit this information in the future. So the bullet points that are presented in the slides are not obviously super detailed. They're built for a presentation, but I want to supply some of the background information in case you want to revisit this in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, we've had better attachments, we had improved templates, wider FDP template adoption, more members in the expanded clearinghouse, better and updated FAQs and guidance, and improved systems rollout at individual institutions. So a lot has changed since we developed and launched the survey in 2019. And while the working group was finalizing our analysis, someone suggested, maybe we have improved since 2019, and I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we have on average. But there's still room for improvement, and I still think the concerns that we had when we launched this subaward delays survey, a lot of the concerns still remain. So I think what we want to do is we want to focus on the more egregious delays and what we can do to prevent egregious delays. But that might involve accepting what I refer to as an industry standard, which seems like, based on our analysis, is something like 45 days from the prime award start date, 45 days from the project period start date, that anything up to that point shouldn't really be considered a delay. That should be considered the normal course of business, at least right now, given the staffing that we have right now, given the system solutions that are available to our institutions. But if we can sort of get on board with the 45-day timeline that's just associated with the basic work that subawards and subaward amendments require. This might impact certain institutions more than others, but there was not only data from the subawards delay survey, but the poll that we took during the September 2020 FDP presentation seemed to indicate that most people are okay with 45, and a lot are even okay with 60 days from the prime award start date. As far as the recommendations go, you're going to see some recommendations in here that seem obvious. You're going to see some recommendations that seem idealistic, and you're going to see some recommendations that are just to continue the status quo, because some things are working. What I wanted to do, and what the working group wanted to do, was document the recommendations that we heard from the survey respondents and echo their concerns and echo their suggestions in this presentation, and kind of document what the responses were going forward. We also were able to learn a lot beyond the original scope of the survey, which was how can we prevent subaward delays from the project start date to sending a draft out the door. But we learned a lot more about just the subaward process in general. So some of these recommendations do go beyond the strict scope of the initial survey. And most importantly, these are recommendations and they're not directives. These aren't mandates or anything like that. These are recommendations. These are food for thought. So we welcome any feedback you have, positive or negative, any reactions you have. Feel free to enter into the chat or email us, contact the subaward subcommittee afterwards, and we'd be happy to look into things more deeply for you. Next slide, please. So we broke the recommendations into 4 different groups: recommendations for FDP as a whole, recommendations for the subaward subcommittee, recommendations for individual institutions, which is the majority of the recommendations, and then some recommendations for individuals that work on subawards. When it comes to FDP as a whole, the biggest takeaway that I had was to somehow link what we're talking about right now and what we have in the survey results to discussions going on with faculty. The number one reason cited by administrators for what causes delays is, quote, waiting on the principal investigator or department, end quote. Okay. And then we have the faculty workload surveys that have principal investigators citing an increasing, or at least not decreasing, amount of administrative burden associated with their work. So there's something there. And there's some conversation that these survey results and these recommendations might be able to inform outside of the subaward subcommittee and even outside of the research administration committee. So I want to look for ways in which we can present this information and some of these recommendations to the faculty that don't want to be burdened in the first place. So, and more on that and some of the recommendations for individual institutions later in the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, I have a few recommendations for the subaward subcommittee. So this is where I kind of recommend to myself what I should be doing in the future with the subaward subcommittee and my fellow co-chairs. I think posting and citing the survey results and recommendations would be really helpful, essentially making all this public, because there's a lot in here that can reinforce the consensus that we've worked hard to achieve and can now serve as quantitative evidence that that we do recommend best practices and promising practices. And something like, for example, granting automatic carry forward to your subrecipients when the federal awarding agency grants it to you. Something like 97% of our institutions do that. So maybe we want to cite the survey in a footnote in the FAQs and guidance saying, this really is a best practice, and that's borne out by the evidence that we have based on this survey result. There's also some results here that the data is like nice to have at this point, but it could become more useful in future contexts. So we should hang on to these results and refer back to them in future working groups and discussions. I also think that we should invite member institutions that think they have it figured out or that have made great leaps and bounds in reducing subaward delays to come and present. There might be some of you out there that say, well, we can get them out the door. We can get draft subawards out the door in 10 business days, and here's how. And so we'd be interested in inviting those institutions to come and present, especially as we start seeing more innovative system solutions. I think it'd be helpful to hear from institutions as to what they're doing and how they're increasing turnaround, or how they're decreasing turnaround time when it comes to drafting subawards and subaward amendments. Next slide, please. Okay, a few more recommendations for the subaward subcommittee. There were a lot of comments, a lot of responses that said we need more related to risk assessment and subrecipient monitoring. We need more tools, more guidance, better guidance, updated tools, all that. So I wanted to highlight in bold that updating and refining the risk assessment questionnaire and the continuing assessment tool, other tools related to these areas and guidance is something that the subaward subcommittee should focus on. And the good news is we are, or we plan to. We plan to revive the subrecipient monitoring tools working group in conjunction with the expanded clearinghouse. So there is not only volunteer opportunities to get involved in that in the very near future, but hopefully some more tangible tools that the subaward subcommittee can produce for the community who are asking for help in this area. And then much of the subawards workflow depends on document collection and exchange of institutional information. So these are other areas where we can work closely with other subcommittees at FDP to streamline the process of how we make institutional information available to one another in advance of the subaward drafting stage, and how we might be able to even exchange documents in advance of the subaward drafting stage as well. And then just some suggestions from the survey respondents about exploring different file formats for our subaward and subaward amendment templates for better local systems integration at member institutions. And something that has emerged more and more in the recent year is digital signatures and institutions using their own subaward portals to route subaward workflow. And so maybe something that we would want to talk about at a future FDP meeting and see how that's working and explore the pros and cons of it. All right, next slide, please. Now there's a few slides here with a lot of recommendations for FDP member institutions, and these make up the bulk of the recommendations the Subaward Delays Working Group was able to generate from our survey analysis. There are process solutions that can be low cost or no cost solutions, just shuffling around the steps in a business process. And then there can be some system solutions that can get quite expensive. But because the number1 response for the reason for delays is waiting for the principal investigators and departments, it seemed very logical that any way in which we can prompt PI's departments instead of waiting for them, whether that's through a process solution or a system solution, an automated system solution, we should look into both of these. So we should think in both a process mindset and a systems mindset. How can we get ahead of the game? How can we prompt PIs who, again, do not want to be or aren't very interested in additional administrative burden and might be open to things like more automated notifications or easier ways to signal that they want to initiate subawards and amendments in conjunction with their own awards. And then administrators should analyze what decisions that they're leaving up to their PIs. Some of them are going to be perfectly appropriately left up to PIs, but some of them might not be. And so there might be things that we can do as administrators to better support PIs. And yes, they're ultimately responsible for their projects. But when it comes to the administration surrounding the projects, maybe there is more we can do as administrators on their behalf. I mean, it may be idealistic to say, let's begin the subawards process when we begin the prime award process, and that makes subawards less of an afterthought. But in a lot of business processes, the subawards, the clock doesn't start on subaward processing until the prime award is set up. This could be 1-2 weeks, a month after the start date. So you're already starting from behind. So I just recommend looking at ways in which the subaward process can begin and start and run concurrently with the award process, even if it means you don't have a complete draft, even if it means you're not ready for signatures, but explore ways to get the clock started on the subawards process sooner in the overall award timeline. And then when I say issue draft subawards ASAP, that just means as soon as possible. It doesn't mean immediately, as soon as possible. So explore ways in which you could get a subaward draft out the door while meeting all of your internal requirements, but getting a subaward draft out the door and looking at what you can hold until full execution or until even after signatures. Next slide. In September 2020 at our meeting, we polled the attendees, and they said that 2/3 of respondents said that checklists and processes, internal checklists and processes, are more burdensome and more time consuming than gathering requirements from subrecipients. So I did want to point out, I do think it's important to note that internal document collection is a heavier lift than external document collection. And the survey, not just the September 2020 poll, but the subaward delays survey does contain data that support this as well. So streamlining internal document collection and looking internally is certainly a recommendation here. And remember, when you add extra requirements, that doesn't just add administrative burden for the subrecipient, it adds administrative burden for you as the pass-through entity as well. So I also suggest paring down checklists to what is truly required by the federal awarding agency and leveraging some shared resources that we have so we're not duplicating efforts. The middle bullet point there, minimizing the number of handoffs and approvals in the subaward workflow or business process. So we had a couple dozen institutions share their subawards business processes, and I read them all. And the subaward working group, the subaward delays working group also went through them. And this is let me insert some like personal, my subjective takeaway, my initial reaction in reading these business processes, including my own institution's business process. There is a lot of bouncing around when it comes to the subaward workflow. There's a lot of step-by-step checklists that are inflexible in that you have to complete this step before you move to the next one. You have to complete this step before you move to the next one. There's very little concurrent actions in these business processes, and some of them are still very good. But a recommendation to minimize the number of handoffs and approvals, I think, is something we should all take a look at, because with every handoff comes more time. With every approval, with every box that needs to be checked is more time. And especially when future boxes that need to be checked and future approvals hinge on this one getting done at this point in time before anything else can move forward. So I do think this is important to note. And Amanda, do you want to chime in here?
Those are really great points. I actually just wanted to point to a couple of comments that have come in. I don't know if you want to take them now or wait until the end.
Sure. Yeah, we can bring them up now.
Sure. So Jamie had mentioned, considering what happens when there's increase in the time between the prime award start date and the receipt of the draft subaward by the subrecipient, when it's the result of extended negotiations between the prime and the pass-through entity. So say it's a contract or a foundation agreement, and the start date's supposed to be 5/1, and it takes you 3 months to negotiate it, as opposed to our standard grants that come through and you've got the notice of award and there's nothing to negotiate. So, just thinking about a kind of way to holistically think about how do you also consider those elements of the process as well. And then the other comment was a question that said, are there institutions that have an established automated notification to the PI to initiate subawards? If so, what is the mechanism for doing so? And are you notifying the PI or their administrators or both?
Yeah, like I said, I think we should seek those that have system solutions like that, and even present a slide at future FDP presentations, or email the listserv a map of what they're doing, because some people that submitted their business process submitted it in like a bubble chart, like flow chart type format. And I do think it's good to hear like what system solutions people have. I think we should hear more about that. Regarding the delay, if it's due to a late prime award or extended negotiations in the prime award, in a future slide here, one of the recommendations is to explore creative prioritization of outgoing subawards, in that the project start date really is, I think, the most important thing when you're trying to prioritize outgoing subawards. I don't think we should prioritize high dollar value subawards over small dollar values. I don't think we should prioritize amendments over initial subawards. I think we should prioritize what are the ones furthest from the start date for whatever reason, and just explore different ways instead of first in, first out. And this goes back to the workflow process. A lot of people who responded to the survey said, I do the subawards, it doesn't fall on my desk until weeks into the process, and they treat things as first in, first out. And so maybe there's a way to be more creative about how to prioritize, knowing that it might not be, now in some cases it might be, but it might not be the dollar value that is the most important thing here. It's just a delay is how far we are from the start date of the project. And if we can sort of reorganize our to-do lists with those that are already out there, the farthest from the start date for whatever reason.
And I think that's an excellent point. I do want to also raise that sometimes those big dollar ones are also the high profile ones. And so that those are the ones that there might be additional factors that are weighing on people's minds in terms of getting those ones out the door because just related to the profile component of it too. Courtney offered a really good thought. She said, at my institution, we run a report on a monthly basis with new accounts that have been created that have the subaward funds allocated to the appropriate GLs. We then email the PI and department and ask them to submit a request for a subaward. This has helped to streamline our process to some degree. That I thought was really interesting. And then Maura Harris said, yes, our award notification system sends an email to the department PI off our system and also has a statement regarding subs. Our sub team prefers to have a kickoff meeting when there are many subs under one award. And then I know at Northeastern, one of the efforts that we've undertaken to reduce the time is just when we're doing the award setup to notify the PI that we're starting their subawards and say, we're going to use the proposal documents unless you've got something different that you now want us to use. So that's some of what's in the chat, and I'll let you finish.
Yeah. Yep. That's it's all good stuff. And I know we surveyed everyone, we got their responses, we did analysis, we're presenting recommendations, and then people have more recommendations based on that. That's a good thing. These are recommendations, they can inform discussions at your home institution, or if this is a sanity check and it's verifying, okay, what we're doing is working and we're comfortable with it, then that's great. We just want to support that as well. Okay, next slide, please. All right, now this first one might look ridiculous. It might be impossible, but not only impossible, it might actually be less efficient to engage in the subaward process too early. So I understand that, but something about notifying subrecipients and collecting documents earlier in the process might be beneficial. When Kathy Creedler initiated the subaward delays survey, in her presentation, she used the word churning, which was all the follow-up emails. When can we expect this? Just checking on this, just following up on this within those first 30, 60 days and beyond of the subaward period. And that is ultimately useless back and forth, right? Because what good does it really do if you're like, oh, now we know we're going to get the subaward in another month. I just don't think that churning, I think that's a great expression for it because it doesn't really get you anywhere. So maybe pass-through entities could notify subrecipients or initiate document collection a little bit early in the process, heading off some of that churning that is inevitable once you get to 30, 45, 60 days. And I have, as a subrecipient, seen some institutions, I can't remember who they were. I have been contacted as a subrecipient before I saw the draft to either verify a budget or provide attachment 3B or something like that, or engage with a pass-through entity through their own institutional portal. It's rare, but I've seen it and I was okay with that. It seemed like that was an efficient step to take. But when we do engage earlier in the process, we have to also make sure that we're not just moving administrative burden to a different place, that we're actually trying to reduce the administrative burden. I also think we should look at the quote unquote upon request options. I know the subaward template allows for documents like IRB and IACUC approval to be collected upon request. Upon request allows you to still meet the requirement that you need to meet, but not hold up a draft or not hold up signatures for that document. And the survey results were very clear that general subrecipient questionnaires are not too popular and are becoming less and less popular. So I just wanted to reiterate here, continue to minimize the use of general questionnaires unless warranted by specific concerns, whether it's specific high-risk project or a high-risk subrecipient, which you should not be seeing too much of if you're dealing with FDP institutions. Next slide, please. Okay, another thing, this might seem absurd. More staff, dedicated subaward staff. The number 2 most cited reason for subaward delays was we don't have enough staff. We don't have enough FTEs. So I want to reflect, I want to echo the comments from the community. I think it's important to document. And it seems like those that were more comfortable with their subaward process had a dedicated subaward staff. Or components that let's say at least one FTE dedicated to subawards and not having their attention pulled in different directions. They could truly focus on subawards. And central subaward email addresses seem to also streamline workflow by having everything come in and you're not waiting for people that might be out on vacation and whatnot. Someone just mentioned running reports. So it's not just running reports of new awards that have subawards under them, but it's maybe setting like a 90-day, like what subawards are still hanging out there as pending in your system after 90 days, because preventing egregious delays, I think the egregious delays are the ones that cause the most risk for both the pass-through entity and the pass-through entity and the subrecipient. They become harder to resolve the further on they go, because then you have questions about costs incurred under advance accounts and whatnot. But maybe adding a step into our business process to run reports and catch these subawards to prevent egregious delays, especially if they need to be escalated to someone else who could engage, say, their FDP admin counterpart if something is going on, or if something seems to be taking too long. But these should be exceptions. And our data show that subawards 90 days after the project start date are rather exceptional. They're not necessarily the norm. So if we could focus more on preventing them, they tend to be the ones that stick in our mind and shape our perceptions. If we have one that's particularly painful, it's going to have an outsized impact on how we think about subawards compared to the one that just showed up 45 days later and we're like, okay, this is fine. And then there's the bullet point at the bottom there about exploring creative ways to prioritize subawards. And I would just suggest that the project start date is really what we want to focus on. If you have a list of pending subawards, I would suggest sorting that list by the project start date. I understand what Amanda said about high visibility awards. Sure, that will happen. Or the need to have kickoff meetings if there's a lot of subs under a project. But I do think that that we could look at the project start date, because that really is, that's what a delay is. It's number of days beyond the project start date. Next slide, please. One of the more puzzling results in the survey data was that it takes exactly the same amount of time to do amendments as it does to do initial subawards, which seems counterintuitive. It seems like amendments should go quicker. And so the first bullet point is we suggest continuing to use amendments instead of new subaward agreements for continuation years. 90-something% of the community already does this. So this is safe to say the best practice. But a lot of comments that we had from those that responded to the survey were along the lines of, I wish my institution would lighten up the process for amendments, or I wish we could do amendments faster, or I think we can do amendments faster. Now, I understand there's a lot of limitations when it comes to granting signature authorities and to sign on behalf of the institution, but there may be some leeway here. whether it's signatures or whether it's the level of the person who needs to approve a subaward amendment, maybe that could be one level below what it takes to set up an initial subaward. And I'll just say that at the end of the subaward amendment, one of the last sentences, all other terms and conditions of the subaward agreement remain in full force and effect. So you've already done most of the work. You rarely negotiate FDP subaward amendments. So it's just a matter of getting the dates and dollars correct. So maybe we could look at some more flexibility there. The last bullet point, I do think expanding unilateral amendment use will help. Only 1/3 of our community uses unilateral amendments, whereas the vast majority of our community is willing to accept unilateral amendments. A lot of people have reservations around unilateral amendments. Sometimes they send it out and then process it in their system, and then the subrecipient comes back, and it leads to more back and forth than a bilateral amendment would have led to in the first place. But I think that's exceptional. I think that's not necessarily the norm. That's the exception. So I think there might be room here to at least explore using unilateral amendments more for non-substantive changes. And yes, there still is some debate about the definition of a non-substantive change, but we have, as best we could, defined that term in our FAQs and guidance document. And most people do agree with it. I'll go out on a limb and say that more than 50% buy the definition that we have published on non-substantive changes.
I think that's true, Kevin, especially because people are accepting if they didn't accepting unilateral mods, and if they didn't agree with that definition, they wouldn't be accepting those unilateral mods. And I think you said that the survey indicated that maybe people are more willing to accept them than to issue them. So it's very interesting. There were a couple of comments and questions that came in while you were doing this. So Melissa had a comment, wondering if adding a step early in the process to notify a subrecipient that a sub will be forthcoming might alleviate some of the downstream impact. Kevin, to your point, I think about the just churn of, hey, is there a subaward coming? Where's our subaward? At least a notification saying we're working on it gives you a contact person. It gives you a sense of maybe even timeline. We would like to prompt our departments more for their sub requests right at the award time, because it gives the subs team unpressured admin time to fully execute the sub. It's rarely urgent within the first 30 days of the award date. So that was just kind of a comment on the process. Another general comment that it might be good to explore subcontracts key performance indicators, KPIs, as related to subcontract FTEs. And then someone else shared that they agree because they recently used such data to add an FTE in order to maintain or reach a certain KPI. And then there was a question that maybe, I don't know if we'll be able to fully answer, but how do you leverage a more central process / staff with coordinating the main analyst in charge of the prime award? Is it adding admin burden to some extent? We are looking at having one person in our smaller sub portfolio manage the subs essentially once they're set up and agreements are signed. Do you recommend having a centralization of the process earlier on? And one person recommended just saying, make sure that person has the right level of experience and communication, and kind of and there's some really set standardized tasks that can help them get oriented with that crosswalk.
Yeah, and I agree that, and that's something that we do at my institution at Harvard Medical School. We largely centralize outgoing FDP subawards and amendments with one person, and they do have to work with the portfolio owner or the person who's managing that award. But I would say that this is another area where it seems like if more than one person is involved, it's always with one person, then with another person, and it has to go here, it has to go there. This person needs to approve of it, then this. So you can both centralize and run things concurrently. I don't want to get into the specifics now, nor make this about like my particular process, but yeah, I would just think about centralizing with dedicated subaward staff, but in conjunction with looking for any way in which you could make processes concurrent. Like start the drafting if you're waiting for one final piece of information, confirmation from the PI, or one final piece of information from the person managing the award, so that the person isn't starting the draft when they could have had it all but that data point complete and ready to go. Okay, next slide, please. Now, I don't know to what extent we can do this first bullet point, or to what extent that would even be helpful. But some people have talked about, not just in the subaward delay survey, but in other working groups and other conversations I've had, about issuing subawards for more time and using amendments to add dollars at annual continuations. I don't know if this would help prevent the pressure of account closeouts at the subrecipient, or is that what causes all the follow-up emails because they have an end date and nothing beyond that end date in their system? And therefore they want to put the pressure on the pass-through entity to get them the document they need to make the change in their system and give them breathing room and keep the project going. But something to throw out there to consider, subawards for longer than 1 year, with only 1 year of dollars, and then adding dollars subsequently. I also think if you're willing at your home institution to just hyperlink directly to the FDP FAQs and guidance, I'm not sure anyone does that, but if some individual is reading a business process and has a question, be happy to direct people directly to the landing page, the FDP Subawards landing page. There's a lot of good resources there that people might not know about. And then I'm not saying to elevate FDP guidance and FAQs above individual or institutional preferences, but I'm saying to consider what the FDP guidance and FAQs and sort of the consensus that we publish is. I mean, I think all too often a subaward delay could be attributed to an individual preference. And I'm not saying this is like nefarious at all. It could just be someone that has a high workload, or doesn't focus exclusively on subawards, but yet has to approve of a subaward in the process. Or it could be just an innocent misunderstanding or not aware of what the FDP consensus is. So hopefully when we publish this presentation and some of the recommendations, or if we cite the survey results in our FAQs and guidance, we can help those of you at your home institutions that would like to maybe go with the prevailing consensus over institutional or individual preferences. Sometimes there's no way around this, and that's fine. I'm not saying let's try and subvert institutional policies. I'm not saying that at all. But sometimes there is a way around, or there is a way to update a business process. And we want to provide you with the evidence or supporting documentation if that's something that you want to explore at your institution. And in the survey responses, a lot of people said that they thought that there was room to improve in their subawards business process and that they wanted to improve it. Nobody was proud of subaward delays. And I agree. I think there's room to improve my own process. I'm actually responsible for the outgoing subaward process at Harvard Medical School. And I absolutely think there's room to improve and would like to improve things along the lines of the prevailing consensus that we see here at FDP. Again, digital signatures and routing systems have emerged as more popular over the last year. So it's something that institutions should explore, and the FDP Subawards Subcommittee can also look at as well. Okay, I have one more slide. Next slide, please. And this is the only slide with recommendations for individuals. I just think I've seen so many people email the FDP listserv and get immediate and very helpful responses from all across the country, from all different types of institutions. So that's a great way to get a second opinion on something, to clarify if you have a question. Now, I'm not saying this will prevent subaward delays, but if you are wondering what you're doing, if what you're doing is correct, or if what you're doing matches what other people are doing, if you're comfortable posing that question publicly, don't hesitate to email the listserv. If you would rather to seek consultation in a more private manner, then just email the subawards at the fdp.org, and the co-chairs will do our best to get back to you. And then as an individual working on subawards, I do think it's very helpful to be familiar with, you don't have to memorize it, but be familiar with the FDP guidance and FAQs, and use that as a resource to refer to when you come across questions or disputes with other institutions. Okay. I think most people who work on subawards just want to make sure they're doing the right thing. And when you have people that just want to make sure they're doing the right thing, that could contribute to delays, right? That could, when people don't want to deviate from a process and they want to make sure they check the boxes, this is a good thing. And so again, this goes back to maybe 45 days is just, that's the institutional standard here. That's the industry standard. So I just, I learned in this survey that a lot of people want to improve the process, that some things are working. And I hope that some of these recommendations you can refer back to in the future. And again, I'm going to post some additional supporting documentation. Next slide. And before I go for today, thanks to everyone that helped develop the survey back in 2019. And thank you to all the institutions that responded to the survey and were very willing to share a lot of their institutional information with the working group. And a special thanks to Kathy Creedler and Frank Law at UT Health. This was Kathy's idea. It was a great idea. And I hope that the working group did it justice and can improve the way the community looks at subaward delays. And then Frank really helped with the Qualtrics survey and everything in producing reports. Brenda was involved throughout, helping develop the survey all the way through to completion. We appreciated her efforts. And then Jean, Joe, Tracy, and Ginger joined at relatively last minute or the last few weeks and agreed to meet on a weekly basis to round out the analysis, complete the analysis. And the spirit of volunteerism at FDP was just wonderful. They were very helpful. They jumped in, they helped get this across the finish line. And so I'm grateful for their efforts as well. So I am done rambling for now. We can address some more questions, Amanda, or we can move on to the next topic and pick it up at the end if we still have time.
Yeah, why don't we may want to do that so that we can have some discussion about the state law question that we want to bring up. But there are a lot of really great comments in the chat. I think people are really engaged with the work that you guys did. I think I mean, I personally found it really interesting, and I think you guys did a great job presenting the information. So thank you very much for doing all of that, not only to Kevin, but also to everyone else that participated in the working group. So we're going to move on to the state law discussion. And this is a really interesting discussion that kind of came to our attention when two institutions were negotiating. They're both member institutions. One was a private institution in another state from the pass-through entity, which was the state institution. And it came up because, you know, there are times where our state institutions are required by their state legislatures to include additional clauses in all their contracts. And usually when they make these laws, they don't carve out, except for research subawards under the FDP or anything like that. So a really good kind of specific example of this is the use of E-Verify. So for those of you who have not experienced E-Verify, it's often contained in federal contracts, and it's basically a requirement to use a federal database, cleverly called E-Verify, where you're supposed to check the work authorization of the individuals being hired onto a federal contract to make sure that they have the appropriate authorizations. And so some state legislatures, I've pulled out 4 here. There may be others that I'm just not aware of. I tried to do my research, but I may have missed some that actually the state requires that all contracts that involve the state entity flow this down for any contractor slash subrecipient slash any recipient of that state funding, have an e-verify clause in there. Next slide, please. Oh, Oklahoma requires it as well. So, this is a really interesting question that came up because you've got somebody in one state who's a private institution that says, well, wait a minute. It's one thing to ask us to accept this for a federal contract where it's very specifically flowed down by the FAR. And then the state has expanded this requirement in a way that our business process doesn't allow for. And we can't e-verify everyone at our institution because that's not our process, and yet that's what we're being asked to do in effect, in some ways under the subaward. So we went back to the FAQs as Kevin was highlighting them earlier, and then FAQ 52, page 22. The state specific laws should only be incorporated when the state law requires the incorporation into the subaward, such as some states may have requirements around conflicts of interest that must be incorporated into all state contracts. State institutions should be mindful that addition of such terms must be supported by state law and that the additional requirement does not conflict with applicable federal laws. Next slide, please. So, as we were going through this and we looked at the text of the e-verify clause, I would say the e-verify clause is kind of the minimum, if you will, and that basically says on a federal contract, you need to run people through the e-verify system. And so the state law doesn't conflict per se with the e-verify clause, but the state law goes above and beyond the e-verify clause. And that's really where the conflict kind of comes into play. So we wanted to open this up for a discussion with you guys to have a little bit of dialogue on both sides of this issue. One, from a state public institution issues, how to say private institutions or institutions in other states react when you have to send these additional terms. What kind of communications or supporting documents do you have available on your website, in your emails that you send out? And how do you vet the requirements to make sure that what you're flowing down is a required inclusion? What process do you go through? Would just be helpful to understand. And then for private institutions or public institutions in another state, what do you do when you get terms like an e-verify clause that your strict interpretation says, well, wait a minute, we don't do e-verify on anyone who isn't hired onto specifically a federal contract. And how often does this come up? Do you get a lot of these? And then, of course, just have there been any conflicts of our state says we will not do employment eligibility verifications unless it is federally mandated, with something like, a state requirement saying we're just going to e-verify everyone and we're going to do that verification with everyone. So we're going to kind of open the floor up. One thing as people start raising their hands and maybe offering thoughts in the chat that I also wanted to offer was one of the institutions was a state of Florida institution, and they shared with us that they actually have, all the state institutions within the Florida university system or network try and get together to have some dialogues around what they're doing with their contracts, what they're doing with their terms and conditions. And so they very nicely offered to bring this back and talk to some of the other fellow institutions to see how do they handle it. Is there anyone who happens to have a different interpretation? What information do they share with their subrecipients, et cetera? Which I thought was a really nice approach when you are a state institution to leverage that network of other state institutions in your state so that you can work through some of these challenges with business partners that have the same restrictions that you have. So with that, is there anyone who wants to talk a little bit about state law? David Mayo, I will ask you to unmute, please. Go for it.
Hi, Amanda. So I just wanted to maybe throw out some info, at least it's my understanding of how E-Verify is supposed to work, setting aside how a particular state may have chosen to implement it. Because we went through, Caltech went through this when I don't know, 2012, 13, whenever E-Verify came into being, there is not a financial assistance implementation of it. It is only in the FAR, and it's a FAR clause, and it only applies to contracts if the FAR clause is in that contract. But the default implementation for E-Verify is that once you receive, as an institution, one contract that includes E-Verify, you must do E-Verify across the board for all your employees, regardless of whether they're employed on that contract. That's the default implementation. But the implementation has an exception for universities, that an educational institution can choose to perform the E-Verify validation only on contracts in which the clause appears. Caltech chose to take the minimalist approach, so we only do it because it's a huge effort. We operate JPL. JPL has one contract and it's in there, but they have to do it for everything. Every single employee has to be E-Verified, for lack of a better term. We do it only on contract employees, but we have a flag in the financial system. So when we set up an account that's going to manage an E-Verify subject contract, we flip the flag. That lets HR know that individuals need to be verified on that contract. So we've had that in place for years. So if we were to see E-Verify in a flow down of financial assistance, we could address it simply by flipping the flag. It just becomes another one of those annoying awards where we have to do E-Verify, but we've got the process in place. We would push back because what is it doing in a financial assistance subaward? But if we ended up having to accept it, we could manage it.
That's a great point, and thank you for clarifying some of the pieces around the implementation, because I think it really is an institutional business decision how you're going to manage that. And as universities, you do have some flexibility with it. I know that my institution has chosen to E-Verify everyone, so there is no switch that gets flipped, and so we are always able to actually accept that when it comes through in a subaward. And Mark Sweet from UW-Madison is saying Wisconsin chose to follow the same process as Caltech. Suzanne, you had your hand raised as well. Let me ask you to unmute.
Hey. Sorry, I'm just finished eating lunch, so now I'm a little jokey. We have a state requirement that every single vendor completes what's called a grant or contract and grant disclosure and certification form. Sub-recipients are considered vendors. This has caused a great deal of agita, as my friend from New Jersey would say, amongst a lot of our sub-recipients. There are a few outs that people have. So if you are a government entity, public education institution, federal government, or a body of local government, you're exempt from completing the form. Everybody else who wants to do business with the state of Arkansas has to complete this form as part of our sub-recipient process. We do not have the terms and conditions added in the additional terms section of the agreement. It's just an additional document that we sent. I would love to hear from other people who would fall into one of the non-exempt categories as to how we can explain this requirement better without having people accuse us of asking them to commit fraud.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting question to ask, and I really appreciate how difficult this is to manage, because it's not something that you control. This isn't something that, you know, your institution just said, oh, we're going to implement this because we think it's a best practice. You know, it's something that's kind of handed to you by another governing body, and then it creates these additional conflicts that are very difficult to manage. Jamie, you have your hand up. Do you want to speak? Let me ask you.
Yeah, so actually I can speak to Suzanne. I think I'm working with Suzanne on this right now. I think the problem we have as a private institution in dealing with this, and sometimes some of the other state requirements that we see, is the scope is so incredibly broad that asking an institution who is not of that state to find a way to comply is a heavy, heavy lift. So I think in the scope of the one that Suzanne was speaking to, you know, the scope of applicability is every single employee at our institution, whether or not they as an individual have a conflict or have an agreement with the state of Alabama. I don't know exactly how to fulfill that as an institution who's not in the state of Alabama. And I've seen this come up a couple of other times before. So I can appreciate absolutely the place that state institutions are in. I used to be at a state institution myself. But I think there needs to also be some understanding that, you know, as not being of that state, the scope of some of these state requirements are so broad that it is not an easy lift for an outside entity to find a way to comply with these state terms. And so we're forced to try to find the outs that we can before employing, you know, a massive undertaking at our institution to find compliance with one small subaward requirement.
And then, you know, I would never recommend an institution to do this, but you know, part of your analysis, I imagine, or I would imagine in that scenario might be, well, what if we don't comply with it? Or, you know, what if we just choose to do, you know, we're just going to do the people that are assigned directly to this contract, and that's the best we can do. And how do you go about resolving that with the other institution? Are you able to resolve that? And I think some of that comes down, Jamie, as you indicated, to the interpretation. So it really always comes back to, well, what is it that the law says? And some of these state laws may have more flexibility built in there than others. Stephanie Stone had a comment that said, it's helpful when state entities provide detailed policy documentation or a reference to the state law so we can review firsthand and see what we may need to comply with or how we may be able to interpret. And I think that that's a really important point, that when you have these state specific requirements, having a hyperlink or sending a PDF of the document or finding some way to add to that so that the individuals receiving the documentation are then able to go back and look at, okay, so how do we interpret this? Is there any wiggle room for us here? Or, you know, how tied are our hands and the hands of our pass-through entity that we're trying to work with?
Amanda, on that, it seems like, I mean, I agree with that comment, but it seems like the people doing that analysis, interpretation, doing that work, they may not even be in sponsored programs offices. They might be in like general counsel, and it might require like a significant level of escalation and review, especially when an entire institution and all its employees are getting roped into another state's law via one little subaward. So this is just another area where when multiple offices are involved, we could just expect long turnaround times, like no matter what. Like even if the pass-through entity as a state institution is very willing to share what the requirements are, I mean, that level of analysis, and I agree with Stephanie, could be fairly extensive.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, is once you get one of these, it kind of has tentacles and you've got to go to all these different offices and talk to a lot of different people and engage a lot of stakeholders, which certainly adds to the complexity of the subaward. Sherry had a really nice point here. I think one of the biggest problems is that state law is being inserted on federal awards. And so the subrecipient is then asked to accept the laws of another state in order to receive federal money. So, and then Shane Kroons said, state data privacy laws are likely to end up in this category soon as well. And Melanie Rowe mentions another issue we've seen are requirements from state entities to register to do business in that state. This has caused us a lot of issues. I have actually not had that one yet, having to register to do business. But Shane brings up a great point because state data privacy laws may be different in different states. If I'm not mistaken, California has a different state privacy law or an additional state privacy law on top of the standard HIPAA and other privacy protections in other states. So I think, this is really helpful to understand. I'd be interested to know from our member institutions, is this something that you see a lot of, or is this something that kind of crops up in little tiny pockets? I think this would be helpful to understand because we want to know, is this something that we should be spending more time digging into and trying to figure out how pervasive this is, or is this something that is problematic at times, but more ad hoc? I'm not really sure what the best way to go about that is, especially because it would likely result in another survey. And I don't know. I always worry we're sending out too many surveys to people. But if people are willing to share a little bit here or email the subaward co-chairs, I think that would really help us to understand a little bit more about how often is this coming up for you. And you can either send us I am a state institution, and so I have to do this all the time, and it comes up for me often, or I am a private institution and I receive these very infrequently or frequently enough that it's still problematic. Oh, and Suzanne asked a great follow-up question. Has anyone had success in getting an exception to their state rules or laws for subs? I would love to remove this burden from our collaborators. No one? No one? Well, that probably is a tricky one. But this is a good point, is how do you work how do you work around this? And the state entity perspective is that our hands are often tied. So it's hard to go back to your state legislature and actually get them to make an exception or go back and revise the law. It's not something where they have to go back routinely and do a review, codify, amend, amend and then recodify. It really is up to the state entity when they're going to go back and revisit that. It's worth a call to your state's attorney general. That's another good option to handle it, is definitely to see if you as an entity, if you are the state entity or can band together with your other state entities to see if there's any other sources of relief, including your state attorney general. Next slide, please. So just really quickly, we have had at various points some discussion here with the group about subawards to federal entities. Seems like they come up a few times in a few different flavors. There are the CRADAs, which sometimes get used because federal agencies say, well, we have no other way to engage with you. We can't accept a subaward, so we have to do a CRADA. There might be clinical trial agreements, perhaps more specifically with the VA. And then as well, there's some federal agencies that are able to accept a subaward. So we've kind of got a few different flavors of our relationships with our federal partners when they are acting as a subrecipient or a collaborator with us. And so this is another area where we're thinking we'd like to understand how pervasive is this. We've talked about it a few times, and so we're thinking about, maybe putting together a group to explore the potential for maybe putting together some best practices for working with federal subrecipients. So this is more just a call for volunteers for this group. And then also, if you guys have any recommendations for a federal partner, if there's anyone that you can think of or that you've worked with over the years on a situation like this that you think might be interested in engaging with us, we'd love to hear from you. Next slide, please. And now I will turn it over to Kari. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'm going to go over a few updates on the working groups, starting off with the IACUC MOU. As a lot of you know, a year and a half ago, we had our first meeting about the use of MOUs in the context of animal care use. And over the last 2 years, we gathered input on how the FDP could help clarify and streamline the process around IACUC MOUs. So the working group created guidance based on this information, which we then distributed through the listserv for comment, which included the MOU template. And we'd appreciate your thoughts on these documents. So please send those our way. Also feel free to send us case studies or scenarios about how and when you might use the IACUC MOU. And all of the case studies will be anonymized. Let's talk about subcontract guidance. So version 8 of the guidance is officially posted. We now have a significant changes document as well as a completed guidance document. And if you have a chance, please check out the new subaward user guide for the cost reimbursement template. It is absolutely beautiful. Kudos, kudos. Next, we have the human subjects data attachment 7 pilot update. To make resources easier to find, we separated out the attachment 7 files into their own table and added a new user guide. We also crafted a crosswalk document that lines up the subaward template with attachment 7 to the obligations outlined in the DTUA. Since attachment 7 is a pilot, we wanted to gather some data on its use by our members. We've added a survey link and asked members to fill it out about 1 to 2 times a month when you encounter or use the attachment in your subaward process. Our goal is to gather enough use cases to inform future enhancements, outreach, and adoption efforts. Templates and guidance groups. These are ongoing working groups. We routinely update the templates and FAQs based on sponsor updates. And we're currently accepting comments and feedback, so please send those our way. The next round of updates are planned for 2022. And as Kevin discussed, the subaward delay survey has been successfully completed. Thank you all so much for participating. We really, really appreciate it. And those are your working group updates. Next slide, please.
Just another few updates. We are behind the scenes exploring discussions with finance, audit, and costing on next steps related to invoicing discussion from the January meeting. We also just wanted to note that FFATA has come up again. There was a Federal Register notice on potential changes. It's also up for the GAO work stream after SAM.gov, which is in the process of being completed. It was also mentioned in the compliance supplement this past year. So we're having some discussions with various members of FDP and some of our federal agency partners. So we're hoping to have more information soon, but we did want to let you guys know that we are looking at FFATA again, and we will probably have more communications on that coming soon. So next slide, please. Friendly reminder, don't change the templates. They were made to make things easier. And please let us know if you get one with changes. We will help you in contacting the other institution. Next slide, please. And just a reminder, we do have some COVID-19 resources available. We did post some sample force majeure language to the subaward forms page. You are not required to include force majeure in your subaward. So please don't feel like you have to run out and amend all of your subawards to include it. We believe that it is covered by the additional terms of attachment 2, and that is further explained in the sample force majeure language. We give you 3 options. Don't change anything. We think it's already covered in attachment 2. If you really feel like you want something, you want to put something in there, we've got a couple of different options that you can then explore for your use. So that I think that is it for that slide. Next slide, please. And if you email our subawards mailbox, it automatically goes to all the co-chairs. Any last minute comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the, on this slide, which is concluded every subaward subcommittee presentation, but also, like you just said, contact us if you see changes to the template. But the whole state law discussion, this whole agenda item came to us through the subawards at the fdp.org. And many of you know this, but if there's new members here listening for, maybe the first or second time, like we as co-chairs, like do our best to, broker or mediate between 2 institutions that might be running into an issue. And if we see that same issue pop up, then we'll bring it to this broader group. But if we contact you, it's from a place of like wanting to learn more about what your position is. We want to learn more about these issues. It's not some sort of authoritative, we do want to mediate between institutions that have questions or conflicting interpretations on FAQs or guidance that we've posted on the terms and conditions in the template, or what to do when you have to add state laws. So I think when we have reached out to institutions, it largely goes well. And we've had some great conversations, some illuminating conversations. So if you do hear from us, it is coming from a place of us wanting to understand more about your position, and just appreciate your cooperation in that regard.
Awesome, thank you. And I've already got some great suggestions for our next session in September. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss coming soon. If no one has any other comments for us, I think we can give you back a few minutes in your day. Thank you everyone for joining us. Really appreciate it.